This is my true story. I spent my whole life working, saving, and building the home I thought I'd die in. Every brick carried years of sweat and sacrifice. I trusted my son with everything, my health, my hope, my legacy. One day he brought me papers and said, "Just sign here, Dad." I didn't ask questions. I believed he was helping me. The next morning, I didn't own my home. My name was gone, and my heart went with it. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. He came over one evening with a smile that looked practiced. He said he had papers from the bank, something about lowering my bills, refinancing the house, making things easier for me. I didn't understand all the words, but I didn't ask. He was my son. I had trusted him with everything since the day he was born. When he said it was for my good, I believed him. The papers were thick, full of fine print, lines I couldn't read without my glasses. He tapped the page, pointed to where I should sign, and handed me a pen. My hands trembled as I wrote my name. He smiled, patted my shoulder, and said I had done the right thing. I felt proud. I thought I was helping him take care of his family, our family. I didn't know that with each stroke of the pen, I was giving away more than just my signature. I was signing away my home, my safety, and everything I had spent a lifetime protecting. I didn't ask for a copy. I didn't think I needed one. I had always trusted my son more than paper. After he left, I sat in my chair by the window, feeling content. I looked around the room, the pictures on the wall, the old clock ticking beside me, the curtains my late wife had sewn decades ago. I thought I was securing a better future for the family. I didn't know I had just erased my own. That night, I slept peacefully. There was no sign, no warning, no thought that tomorrow would be any different. The air was calm, the house quiet, the world still in order. I had no idea that the next sunrise would take everything from me, not through fire or theft, but through trust. The phone rang early the next morning. I thought it was my son calling to say good morning. Instead, it was a voice from the bank. The man spoke fast, using words I didn't understand at first. Then I heard one sentence that made everything around me blur. "Sir, the ownership of your house has been transferred." I asked him to repeat it. He did. My name was no longer on the deed. My son's was. For a moment, I couldn't move. My hand froze on the receiver. I looked around the house. The same walls I painted, the same roof I repaired after every storm, the same floor where my wife once stood cooking dinner. I felt like a stranger inside my own life. The world hadn't changed, but everything inside me had. I went to the bank that morning. The clerk looked at me with pity. She explained that the documents were legally signed, witnessed, and verified. She showed me copies. My own signature was there. The ink was mine, but the meaning wasn't. The papers I thought were refinancing documents were property transfer papers. I had given away my home without even knowing it. Outside the bank, the air felt heavier. My chest burned as I walked down the street. I passed people smiling, carrying groceries, living normal lives, and I wondered if they knew how easy it was to lose everything with one mistake. The house I had spent 40 years paying off was gone in a night. My lifetime of effort turned into a single sentence on a legal form. When I returned home, I saw his car parked in the driveway. My driveway. He was inside, laughing on the phone, probably talking about his new property. My heart broke in a quiet way, not like glass shattering, but like an old floorboard cracking under too much weight. I sat on the porch steps until the sun went down. The air grew cold, but I didn't move. That night, I realized something important. Paper can take away what blood cannot protect. Trust isn't a signature. It's a test. And I had failed it. I stood outside that house for a long time, staring at the windows that once held our family's laughter. The curtains my wife had stitched fluttered softly, like they were waving goodbye. My feet refused to move. I wanted to believe it was all a mistake, that my son would come out and explain everything. But deep inside, I already knew the truth. I was no longer the owner. I was just an old man standing on land that no longer belonged to him. He stepped out a few minutes later, phone in hand, dressed neatly, smiling as if nothing had happened. He said something about doing what's best for everyone. His tone was light, casual, almost friendly, but every word carried a sting. He spoke as if the home I built, the walls I painted, the roof I repaired, were now just part of his success story. I nodded and said nothing. Sometimes silence hides storms. Inside, the rooms looked different. My chair was moved. The framed photo of my wedding day was gone from the shelf. I asked where it was. He shrugged. I realized then that I wasn't just losing the house. I was losing the respect that once filled it. He told me I could stay for a while, as if I were a tenant, not a father. I thanked him. My voice sounded smaller than I remembered. The following days blurred together. I woke up early as usual, made tea, and sat on the porch. But it wasn't the same. Every creak of the floor reminded me that it wasn't mine anymore. When the mailman came, he greeted my son's name on the envelope. Even the postman had moved on faster than I had. Neighbors whispered. Some avoided eye contact, some pitied me. I could see it in their eyes. They knew. News travels fast in small towns, especially when it involves shame. They said the old man had signed his house away. They said his son had outsmarted him. Maybe they were right. At night, I walked from room to room, touching the walls, remembering where every memory lived. The corner where my wife used to iron clothes. The kitchen table where my son did his school homework. The front door where I'd watched him leave for college. Now he was back, but not as a son, as an owner. One evening, he told me I shouldn't worry about bills anymore, that I should just relax. It sounded like kindness, but it felt like a warning. I realized I had become a guest in my own life. My keys still worked, but not my name. My heart still beat, but not with pride. That night, I sat outside under the porch light, and something inside me hardened. I didn't cry, I didn't shout, I didn't beg. I simply understood that trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild itself. It calcifies into silence. I made a promise to myself. This humiliation would not be my ending. I might have lost my home on paper, but I hadn't lost my mind. The next morning, when he left for work, I walked around the house slowly, room by room. I noticed the small details he overlooked, the hidden compartments, the old filing box in the attic, the drawer that still held my documents. Somewhere inside that paperwork, I remembered, was the family trust, the one my lawyer had set up long before my wife passed. It was old, dusty, and forgotten, but it was still legal, and it still carried my name. As I closed the drawer and stared at the papers, a thought crossed my mind. Maybe losing everything was the only way to remember what still belonged to me. Not property, not money, but power. The kind of quiet, patient power that comes from knowing more than they think you do. That night, for the first time in days, I slept peacefully. Because while my son thought I was finished, I had already started again. Not with anger, but with preparation. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. My son had already left for work. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the table with those old papers I found in the attic. The folder was worn, the corners yellow, the ink fading. But as I turned the pages, I saw my name printed on every one of them. Bold, clear, unshaken. It was the trust agreement my wife and I had signed years ago, back when we were planning our future, long before greed had entered our home. The trust had one clause that I had almost forgotten about. It stated that any property bought, sold, or transferred under the family name would automatically revert to the trust if a fraudulent signature or coercion was involved. My wife's lawyer had insisted on adding that line. I hadn't thought about it since the day we signed it. But now, it looked like the last piece of strength I had left. I remembered sitting in that same lawyer's office decades ago, my wife beside me, smiling as we talked about leaving something behind for our son. She had always believed in protecting the future, not just his, but mine too. That trust wasn't created for wealth. It was created for safety. She had known that love could turn blind, and that one day, paper would be more honest than people. As I read the document, I realized my son had never seen it. He wasn't interested in old files or paperwork. He only cared about what could be sold. He didn't know that by transferring my property without full consent, he had activated the very clause that could take it back. My hands didn't shake this time. I placed the document on the table, straightened it, and smiled for the first time in days. The same pen that took my house away would now help me take it back. That afternoon, I went to the local municipal office. The clerk recognized me. He looked surprised to see me carrying folders instead of begging for help. I asked for the property records. He showed me the updated file, my son's name, fresh ink, shiny new ownership stamp. I asked him to add one note to the file. Disputed under existing trust claim. He hesitated at first, but agreed when I showed him the clause. He said it would take a few days for legal verification. I told him I'd wait. When I left the office, the air felt different. The town looked the same, but I wasn't the same man who had walked there a week ago. I wasn't the father who trusted blindly anymore. I was the man who built every wall in that house, paid every bill, and remembered every word on every form I'd ever signed. I wasn't old and weak. I was patient and prepared. That night, my son came home talking loudly on the phone, laughing, saying something about renting out a room in his house. I stood at the doorway and watched him. He didn't notice the old papers in my hand. He didn't care. He thought the fight was already over. When he went to bed, I sat by the window and looked at the stars. I thought about my wife again. She had always said, "Paper protects what words can't." She was right. That one clause she had insisted on was the key to everything. The next morning, I called the lawyer who had helped us draft the trust all those years ago. He was older now, but his voice was still steady. I told him everything. He went quiet for a moment, then said, "Bring me the file." I knew then that my time of silence was ending. I didn't tell my son. I didn't need to. I had signed papers once out of trust. This time, I would sign out of justice. The next week moved slower than any week of my life. Each morning, I woke up to the sound of my son's voice echoing through the house. His house, as he liked to call it now. He had started walking differently, chest out, shoulders wide, like a man who had conquered something. He'd rearranged furniture, thrown out the old rug my wife loved, and replaced my favorite chair with a new one that didn't belong. Every change felt like another nail in the coffin of my dignity. He invited friends over on the second day. They laughed, drank, and walked around the house like tourists, admiring a new property. I sat outside on the porch, pretending to read the newspaper while their laughter cut through me like glass. I could hear him bragging about his place, about how he finally made something of himself. None of them knew he made it by erasing me. Every time he called it his, I felt the weight of another memory being stolen. On the third day, I went into town. The shopkeepers I'd known for years looked at me differently. They'd heard the story. Everyone had. In small towns, shame travels faster than truth. One man offered to buy me lunch out of pity. I thanked him and walked away. I didn't need food, I needed silence. By the fourth day, I realized something else. He wanted me gone. He didn't say it directly, but I could feel it. The way he looked at me when I entered a room, the way he sighed when I used the stove, the way he rolled his eyes when I coughed too loud. He told me to relax. But it wasn't kindness. It was warning. Every word out of his mouth carried a message. You don't belong here anymore. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The house creaked with the same sounds it always made, but now they felt different, unfamiliar, almost hostile. My wife's photograph on the bedside table seemed to watch me with quiet disappointment. I whispered a promise to her in my mind. I told her I wouldn't let what we built turn into his victory. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I would not leave this world humiliated. On the fifth day, he came home with paint buckets. He said he wanted to freshen up the place. I watched from the garden as he painted over the old front door, the same door I had built by hand 40 years ago. The paint dripped onto the nameplate where my initials used to be. When I wiped them with my sleeve, he told me not to touch it. I smiled. But inside, I was counting hours. By the sixth day, the neighbors stopped saying hello. I saw them whispering as I passed by. They looked at me the way people look at something broken but too polite to throw away. I went home early that day. My hands were shaking. I wasn't angry anymore. I was determined. That night, while he slept, I went to the small wooden chest in my closet. Inside was a folder, receipts, blueprints, land records, and a copy of the trust clause. I ran my fingers over every page like they were old friends. The humiliation was almost over. I could feel it. I wasn't powerless. I was patient. And patience, when mixed with truth, is stronger than revenge. By the 7th morning, I had made up my mind. I ironed my shirt, packed the folder into my briefcase, and left before sunrise. The road to the lawyer's office was long and quiet. Each step I took was heavy with memory, but lighter with purpose. The week that began with humiliation would not end with defeat. When I reached the lawyer's door, I took a deep breath before knocking. My reflection in the glass looked tired, but not weak. I had waited long enough. It was time to remind my son, and the law, who really built that house. The morning I decided to act, the air felt colder than usual. I dressed neatly, packed my documents in a worn leather folder, and walked to the lawyer's office I hadn't visited in nearly 20 years. His name was still on the door, faint but familiar. Inside, the smell of paper and coffee greeted me like an old friend. He looked older, gray at the temples, but his eyes were still sharp. He smiled faintly when he saw me and asked what brought me back. I didn't waste time with stories. I opened the folder, laid the trust papers on his desk, and told him everything my son had done. He read silently for several minutes, flipping through pages one by one. His eyebrows lifted slightly when he reached the trust clause. Then he looked up and said something I'll never forget. "Your wife was a wise woman. She saved you without knowing it." I nodded slowly. I already knew. She'd always insisted on that trust, saying one day it might protect me from something we couldn't predict. That day had finally arrived. He explained the situation carefully. The transfer of ownership my son had made was legally valid only on the surface, but the trust document overruled it. Any transaction that involved manipulation, pressure, or deceit would automatically revert to the trust's control. That meant the house could legally return to me. It would take filing, hearings, and time, but the law was on my side. He prepared the documents while I sat quietly, watching his pen move. Each signature I made that day was different from the one that had cost me everything. My hands were steady now. There was no confusion, no hesitation. I was no longer the father who trusted blindly. I was the man who had built that house with my own hands, reclaiming what was rightfully his. By the time we finished, it was almost noon. The lawyer said he'd personally deliver the filing to the registrar's office. I thanked him, but words felt too small. When I walked out, the sun felt brighter, the ground firmer. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had air in my lungs again. That evening, my son was home early. He sat in my chair, drinking from my cup, talking on the phone about his new property. He laughed loudly, like a man proud of his cleverness. I didn't say a word. I went straight to my room, closed the door, and placed the stamped legal copy of the petition inside my drawer. I didn't need to argue. I had something stronger than anger. Proof. 2 days later, the first official letter came. It was from the court, acknowledging the petition and instructing the bank to freeze all property transactions under my son's name. He found the envelope before I did. I watched from the hallway as he read it once, then twice, his expression shifting from confusion to panic. He stormed into my room holding the paper, his voice trembling with disbelief. I didn't respond. I just looked at him. Calm, quiet, unafraid. He shouted for a while, then left the room and slammed the door. That night, I sat by the window, listening to him pacing in the living room. The same steps that once carried pride now carried fear. The same man who told me to relax and let him handle everything was now the one losing sleep. It's strange how quickly power changes sides when the truth wakes up. Over the next few days, he tried to fix things behind my back. He called bankers, friends, maybe even another lawyer. But every time, the trust papers blocked him. The court's freeze order stopped every move. He couldn't sell, couldn't transfer, couldn't even claim insurance. Every path he tried led back to me, the man he thought was too old to understand anything. By the end of the week, I received confirmation from my lawyer. The petition had been fully accepted. The property was officially marked under legal dispute, pending reversion to the trust. My name wasn't restored yet, but his control was gone. He no longer owned a single thing he took pride in. I placed the letter beside my wife's photo on the table and whispered softly in my mind, "We're almost home again." The following week, my son walked around like a king. He had no idea that the ground beneath him was already slipping. He hosted a dinner for his friends that Friday. Laughter filled the house, plates clattered, and glasses toasted to his success. They called him smart, bold, ambitious. I sat quietly at the corner of the table, eating slowly, watching him bask in pride that wasn't earned. He thought he had won. He didn't know that victory built on deceit doesn't last. He had started redecorating, calling contractors, talking about extensions and new furniture. He even mentioned renting out one of the rooms for extra income. I nodded as he spoke, pretending to listen. Every plan he made was another brick in the wall of his downfall. He didn't know the property had already been marked under legal dispute. He was painting walls that would soon belong to someone else again. To me. A few days later, I saw the first court notice arrive. A plain white envelope with a government stamp. He opened it at the kitchen table while sipping his coffee. His smile faded halfway through reading. His hand tightened around the paper. He looked at me for the first time in days, eyes wide, face pale. I didn't speak. I just kept stirring my tea. Silence was stronger than any argument. He called the bank right after. I could hear his voice rising in the next room. Short words, nervous tone, trying to sound in control, but failing. He stormed outside and made another call. When he came back, he avoided my eyes. He didn't eat dinner that night. The pride that once filled this house was turning into panic. The next morning, his wife started asking questions. I heard them arguing quietly behind closed doors. She wanted to know what disputed ownership meant. He told her it was a mistake, that he would fix it. But he couldn't fix what he didn't understand. The trust clause was already working, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Neighbors started talking again, this time in whispers aimed at him. The same people who once praised his success were now wondering how it had fallen apart so fast. I went to the market one morning, and the shopkeeper who used to pity me greeted me differently. He smiled and said, "I heard things are being made right again." I just nodded. Justice doesn't need to announce itself. It simply balances the scales in silence. At home, my son tried to act normal. He smiled too much, spoke too loudly, and called me dad again like it was a word he had just learned. He made tea for me, offered help, asked about my day. I didn't fall for it. Guilt can mimic kindness, but it always shows its cracks. He wasn't kind, he was scared. He knew the game was over. By the end of the week, he received another letter, this one from the bank. His loan applications were suspended, his credit line frozen, and all property dealings put on hold. I was sitting by the window when he walked in holding the letter. He looked at me, mouth open but no words coming out. He just dropped the envelope on the table and walked away. That night, the house was quiet again. No friends, no laughter, no music. Just silence. I went outside and sat under the same porch light where I had once promised my wife I'd protect what we built. The wind was cold, but it felt clean, like the air after a storm. My son had spent months building a life on stolen ground. For 1 week, he had tasted what victory felt like. Now, all that remained was the bitter aftertaste of loss. The same pen that once betrayed me had become my weapon. The same paper that took everything from me had given it all back. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. I just smiled quietly, knowing that justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through ink and timing. The court date came faster than I expected. I woke up early that morning, ironed my shirt, and placed the trust folder neatly in my briefcase. My lawyer met me at the entrance of the courthouse. He told me to stay calm, to let the documents speak. I nodded. I didn't need to argue. I had already done my fighting in silence. Inside the courtroom, my son sat at the opposite table. He looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders tense. His wife sat beside him, head down, her confidence gone. The same people who once treated me like a fool now whispered behind them, curious how a young man with everything could lose it all to the father he had betrayed. The judge entered, papers shuffled, voices hushed. My lawyer stood first and presented our case. He laid the trust agreement on the desk, pointing to the clause that my wife had insisted we include years ago. He explained how the transfer violated the trust terms, how my signature was obtained under false pretenses, how my son had failed to disclose the true nature of the documents I signed. He spoke calmly, clearly, with the precision of a man holding truth in his hands. When it was my son's turn, he stumbled over his words. He blamed confusion, misunderstanding, emotion, everything except greed. His lawyer tried to build a story of good intentions gone wrong, but the papers didn't lie. Every page showed deliberate planning. Every date lined up too neatly. Every signature from me had a corresponding withdrawal from him. It wasn't carelessness. It was calculation. The judge listened quietly, reading the documents with care. Minutes felt like hours. I kept my eyes on the floor, not out of fear, but respect for the process that was finally giving me back what I had lost. When the judge finally spoke, his tone was firm, but not cruel. He declared that the property transfer was invalid, that ownership would revert to the family trust, and that any financial gain made from it would be reviewed for restitution. For a moment, there was silence, heavy, still, complete. Then it hit me. I had won. Not through shouting or revenge, but through patience, paper, and persistence. My son looked at me across the room. His face was pale, his lips trembling. The arrogance that once lived in his eyes was gone. In its place stood something else. Realization. The bailiff handed me the certified order. My name was restored. The house was legally mine again. My hands didn't shake this time. They were steady as stone. My son stood slowly, staring at the floor. His wife didn't move. She didn't speak to him. The distance between them looked wider than the room itself. When I walked out of the courtroom, the sunlight hit my face. It felt like warmth I hadn't felt in months. The air smelled cleaner. The lawyer smiled at me and said, "Your wife would be proud." I nodded, unable to find the right words. Pride wasn't what I felt. It was closure. That evening, I went home. My home. The first thing I did was unlock the front door and stand in the hallway for a long time. I touched the wall, the same one I had built with my bare hands, and felt something settle inside me. Peace, not triumph. The photos were still gone, the rug still replaced, but the house was mine again. My son didn't return that night. I heard from a neighbor that he'd gone to stay with a friend. I didn't chase him. I didn't gloat. Some victories are meant to be quiet. He needed time to understand the cost of what he'd done, and I needed time to forgive myself, not for trusting him, but for underestimating my own strength. As the sun set, I sat on the porch and listened to the wind move through the trees. The same house that once felt heavy with shame now stood tall again. The same father who was once fooled had become the man who finished the lesson. That day wasn't just the reversal of a document. It was the reversal of power, pride, and perspective. He thought he had taken everything, but in trying to take it all, he gave me back everything that mattered: my name, my peace, and my self-respect. The days after the court ruling were strangely quiet. No celebrations, no visitors, no noise, just peace. I woke up each morning and walked through the house slowly, room by room, touching every wall like I was greeting an old friend. It felt different now. The house wasn't just wood and stone anymore. It was a symbol of survival. I had lost it, fought for it, and earned it back with patience that even I didn't know I had. The first thing I did was fix what had been broken. The gate he kicked shut, I straightened it myself. The paint he spilled on the front steps, I scrubbed it clean. The old photo of my wife, the one he had taken down, I hung back on the wall where it belonged. For the first time in years, the house looked like a home again. Not a property, not an asset, but a place of peace. I moved my chair back to its old spot near the window. The morning light hit the same way it used to when my wife would sit beside me with her tea. I made sure to keep her favorite cup on the table, not because I needed it, but because it reminded me that love built this house, not greed. Every nail, every crack, every corner had a story. My son might have taken the papers, but he never understood the history written in the walls. I didn't hear from him for a while. The town did, though. Word spread fast about what happened. The same people who once pitied me now nodded respectfully when they saw me. Shopkeepers smiled again. The banker who once called me bankrupt apologized when I went to update my documents. I didn't hold grudges. The truth had spoken for itself. One afternoon, I was sitting on the porch when a car stopped at the gate. It was my son. He didn't come inside. He stood there, looking at the house like a stranger looking at something familiar but unreachable. He didn't speak. I didn't move. We just looked at each other in silence. He wanted forgiveness. I could see it in his eyes. But forgiveness isn't something you give out like spare change. It's something earned. And he hadn't earned it yet. After a few seconds, he turned around and left. The sound of his engine faded into the distance. I didn't follow. The nights became easier. I stopped waking up with anger in my chest. I stopped replaying the moment I signed those papers. The pain had turned into understanding. I wasn't the fool I thought I was. I was just a man who believed too much in family. There's no shame in love, even when it's betrayed. The shame belongs to the one who broke it. I started spending more time in the garden. The soil was dry at first, but I worked on it little by little. I planted tomatoes, some herbs, a few flowers my wife used to love. Watching them grow reminded me that even after being uprooted, life finds its way back. Some mornings, I'd sit there for hours, listening to the wind move through the leaves. No shouting, no tension, just quiet. I got letters from the court confirming the property's full restoration under the family trust. My lawyer told me the case would now serve as a precedent for others like me. That made me smile. Maybe my story would protect another old man from signing his life away under the illusion of love. Maybe someone else would learn before it was too late. My days became routine again, simple, steady, and mine. I made my own meals, balanced my own accounts, and locked my own doors at night. There was a calm pride in knowing that everything around me existed because I fought for it the right way. Now, when I sit on my porch in the evenings, the house glows under the setting sun, and I feel content. It doesn't matter how many times you're betrayed. What matters is that you never stop standing up for yourself. My son lost more than property that day. He lost my trust. I lost everything once, but what I regained was far more valuable: peace, dignity, and the strength to never sign blindly again. He once told me, "Just sign here, Dad." I did, thinking it was love. What I didn't know was that I was signing away everything I had built with my hands, my sweat, and my faith. That one moment taught me more about life than 70 years ever did. Trust can build a home, but blind trust can destroy it overnight. I learned the hard way that blood is not a guarantee of honesty. Sometimes the cruelest thieves don't wear masks. They share your last name. Now, every morning when I walk through this house, I remind myself that every corner here has been earned twice. Once by hard work, and once by survival. It's not just a home anymore. It's proof that age doesn't mean weakness. It means patience. And patience, when pushed far enough, becomes power. I no longer look at the house with pride or anger. I look at it with understanding. Everything I lost was temporary. What I gained was permanent. Awareness. People still ask if I forgave him. I don't have an answer. Forgiveness isn't a door you open once and close forever. It's a hallway you walk through slowly, one quiet step at a time. Some days I feel pity for him. Other days I feel nothing at all. Maybe that's what peace looks like. Not revenge, not forgiveness, just stillness. I sometimes see him from a distance. He walks past the gate, slower now, older too. Life has a way of humbling those who mock humility. He doesn't wave. I don't either. We don't need words. The silence between us carries everything: regret, realization, and the weight of choices that can never be undone. I live alone now, but I am not lonely. I eat when I'm hungry, sleep when I'm tired, and spend my evenings watching the sun drop behind the same trees that have seen every chapter of my life. I don't dream of wealth or forgiveness anymore. I just dream of quiet mornings and honest days. My hands may tremble, but they still hold my own pen. I sign nothing now without reading every word twice. If I could speak to every parent my age, I'd tell them this. Love your children, but don't hand them the keys to your life. Help them, guide them, but keep your papers, your home, your name, your independence safe. The world changes fast, and sometimes the danger isn't outside your door. It's sitting at your kitchen table, smiling as it takes your signature. He lost more than my property. He lost the right to call himself my pride, and that loss will follow him longer than any debt ever could. As for me, I didn't win through revenge. I won through patience, through remembering that the truth doesn't fade just because someone hides it behind a contract. I keep one photo of him still, the one from when he was a child, smiling with missing teeth, holding my hand. I don't look at it often, but when I do, I see two people, one who believed love was enough, and another who would one day learn that it isn't. So this is my final thought. Read before you sign, think before you trust, and never let love blind you to logic. You can rebuild a wall, a roof, a life. But once you give away your name, your control, your freedom, it takes everything to earn it back. He took my home for a season. I took back my peace forever. And between the two, I'd say I came out richer.